Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Chuck Rogers. We're going to talk about the transition and lack of transition. We're going to talk tonight about the control of the Senate in the Georgia runoffs with some very interesting things that have happened there. We're going to talk about the last few lawsuits and the last effort on the part of the outgoing administration to try to overturn the election, and we'll talk. I'm sure I'm missing something, but we'll catch up with it as we go along. But why don't we start with we've been talking about Trump so much, and we will get to him later in the show. Why don't we talk a little bit about the transition? And I am a little bit concerned about the precedent with regard to the Department of Defense, but I'm going to let you start. There's a couple of other appointments that were made today that are of interest as well.
Yeah, well, with regard to the Department of Defense, the president-elect and the vice president-elect was there as well. They introduced their nominee, retired four-star General Lloyd Austin, who was in charge of Central Command, U.S. Central Command, which is about as high as you can go without being a five-star. But there is absolutely no question about his integrity, his competence, his willingness to serve. Biden and Harris have known him for a long time, apparently. No question about him personally or professionally. The question comes up is this with regard to former General Lloyd Austin, and that is for the Department of Defense, heretofore, with the exception of Mattis, there is a requirement that if the person who is nominated is a former military person, that's okay, but they have to have been out of the military for 7 years. Right. General Austin retired 4 years ago. Now, that doesn't disqualify him, but it does require a waiver, which has to come from Congress before he can be confirmed. And this happened with General Mattis fairly recently, who was granted the waiver, as we know. Whether Congress wants to do that again and go down this road of not requiring military people to be out of the military for more than 7 years in order to run the Defense Department still remains to be seen. We already, I believe there were 17 who voted against the waiver for Mattis, and already there look to be at least that many in this case as well. That doesn't mean he won't be confirmed, but it just means that it's not going to be easy. And of course, the whole question is, in this country, we have historically wanted civilian control of the military. And that's a deeply rooted and logical kind of principle that we have had. So we'll see if he gets the waiver. Again, there is no question about him personally or professionally. He's more than qualified for the job. The question is about whether he's been out of the military long enough to deserve a waiver. So
I agree, and I really don't know very much about him. I've done a little bit of reading on him. It appears he's not a real hawk on things. He's not a mad push for war, and he might even be a bit of a dove. I mean, we've seen that before. I mean, a lot of military people, once they're out of the military, have become doves. I remember during the 1980s, McNamara and Colby and Admiral LaRocque and all of them were part of wanting to have a nuclear freeze and even some unilateral nuclear disarmament. I mean, so it's not necessarily that a military person is going to take us to war or be part of any type of military coup. It's just that, part of the reason that we have not had a military coup, at least from the military, in the history of this nation is because we've really respected the firewall, between civilian and military. And so it's not so much Austin himself that's a concern for me. It's the precedent. Right. We already did it with Mattis, and everybody gives Trump what he wants. It has to go through two houses to do that. The Senate has to confirm the position afterwards, but it's got to go through the House and the Senate in order to get this waiver. Some of the Democrats were kind of freaking out 4 years ago when it happened with Mattis, and they were kind of saying, never again. Mm-hmm. Again, Austin is making some really nice statements saying that he believes in the sanctity, and he sounds earnest, and he probably is earnest. I'm just concerned about the precedent for that. This is now twice in a row. I'm not sure it's happened before. Maybe it has, but it hasn't happened for quite a while. And I just think that we assume things can't happen in this country.
Yeah, right.
But the reason things don't happen in this country is because we have been very strict about separation of power, about a culture of constitutionalism, and about those firewalls. And it's not that I'm afraid of General Austin. I'm just worried about the precedent for the future, because we're probably going to get somebody authoritarian in again. Maybe even somebody who's more competent than Trump in terms of managing power. It's because we have this crowd of 40% or whatever that just seem to be wanting to go there. And until that peters out, we've got kind of a dangerous thing here. They're not the majority. They don't have a lot of power. There are a lot of cowards in Congress and even in the judgeship, but not a lot of authoritarian drive behind it. Trump really went up against the culture of constitutionalism over these 4 years and became angry with it. I mean, he went in thinking he could fire Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House. He was, and it's not that he's dumb. It's that he was focused on what his power should be in his own words. He, as we've talked about on this show, and has been part of comedy and commentary for 4 years. He really would like to be a dictator, by all indications. And so, do we want to set up a precedent after watching this past 4 years with the democratic institutions pushed to their limit? With an emphatic crowd underneath them. I just don't know that we want to go that route. But and that's nothing about Austin.
That's the whole discussion that's going on right now. And I was reading earlier today that there are some folks who do support General Austin personally and professionally, but like you, have concerns about the precedent that would be set, especially since it comes on the heels of the Mattis waiver in the Trump administration. And they are supposedly, this was an unsourced story that I read, so who knows, but supposedly there are some who are opposed to the waiver who are trying to discuss with Biden and Harris whether there might be other places for General Harris in the administration that would not require Senate confirmation. So who knows? That's one thing. The other thing, you're spot on right about the fact that some in the military are actually doves. And that resonates with me because I come from a family of military folks. I'm one of the few in my family who does not have any military service. But it's interesting to note that occasionally people who have been in the military, especially those who have been in combat and seen it firsthand, are the ones who will tell you that we need to be careful with that and that killing each other is not maybe the best way of solving our problems. They understand the cost and the danger of going to war. And so that's why some of them do become doves while still maintaining that we do need a strong military, of course. But you do hear that from them. And I'm glad you brought that up because I had the same sense from some of the comments I heard from General Austin earlier today. So we'll see how it goes. I hope he ends up in the administration somehow. He seems to be the kind of person high up in the military with that kind of experience that we do want in an administration in some capacity, whatever it is. So, he seems to be one of those good people you just want on your team. So I hope they do find a place, whether it's Secretary of Defense or something else.
Well, I want to recommend an old Mother Jones article from the 1980s. It was either 1984 or 1985. I believe it's available online. You might have to pay to get to read it. It's entitled "Vietnam Hawks Become nuclear doves, and it had a couple of the people I mentioned and a couple more, and their transition. And yeah, they, you talk about people who tend to move from left to right. There are certain types of people who tend to move from right to left. Yeah. Career military people tend to be among those people. Yeah. Priests, country singers for some reason, who knows? But anyway, it's and so yeah, it is something to bring up. And I'm impressed with what he says. Like I said, I don't know anything about it. I hope. What I really hope is that there's at least a discussion in there to back off of the bombing campaigns in Yemen that are just taking out civilians all the time. It doesn't get much reporting on it, but people are dying on a daily basis, and this went through Bush. Through Obama, even. I mean, Obama became known as the bomber in chief because of it. We don't have protests, and then Trump. Everybody says, "Oh, he's actually." Kind of a dove, and I will actually compliment him on some of his responses to Iran. He didn't rush to war with Iran in moments where he could have had the opportunity, but he's dropped more bombs in Yemen than Obama and Bush combined. Yeah. And we need to revisit. That is a war going on that we haven't declared, and we don't occupy Yemen. We just send drones in. And we need. So I'm hoping that he'll visit this. I'm hoping that that Biden will stand up to the Saudi prince on this, because they're the ones with the vested interest in keeping Yemen destabilized. So we'll see. We'll see if they're willing to discuss these publicly or at least privately. To do that, because everybody talks about Afghanistan, pulling out of Afghanistan and pulling out of Iraq, pulling out of Syria, but nobody, the Yemen is something you hear about on Democracy Now, and nobody else wants to talk about it, and it's an ongoing thing, and that's it's something that needs to be addressed. I'm hoping that it gets addressed real quickly. There's another couple of appointments. Marcia Fudge, Congresswoman, African American, she once headed up the Congressional Black Caucus, has been selected for the housing, to be in housing. She actually didn't want that. She wanted to be Secretary of Agriculture because, and had outlined all kinds of ways in which people in the cities, and particularly people of color, are impacted by those policies. Biden went with Vilsack, who was under Obama for 8 years. Apparently did fine. I don't remember him being in the headlines at all, so there were no controversies. I guess he wanted to go with experience there and also his working relationships. So he gave her the housing, and that is a bona fide progressive in that position there, because progressives have been complaining, as has the NAACP complained about the lack of African Americans going in. Apparently they're Latinos, but Asians and African Americans are a bit behind in terms of the appointments as far as their satisfaction, and progressive. So he gets a twofer for that one. He put in a progressive African American. Most African Americans who get elected are progressive. That's just the way it is. But anyway, that's his transition program. It looks like Dr. Fauci is going to be part of his team by all indications. It does look like he's putting together some policy stuff. He's not counting on a tour of the White House or anything like that. He has basically said, if President Trump doesn't want to attend my inauguration, that's up to him. It's not going to affect my life at all. And he's ready to move on, and does seem to, it's hard to correlate, but the stock market, once it became clear that he was going to be the next president, stock markets stabilized. They're in a little bit of trouble now because we got some, as usual, 1932, 1992, 2008, and now 2020. Those are all election years in which a Democrat was elected who had to come in and clean up a mess that was presided over by a Republican president. Major mess. And once again, he's got to do it.
That's right. Republicans are on kind of a roller coaster. There are times when they're real deficit hawks, and then there are times when they're in office when they want to spend a lot of money. So yeah, we have a track record of getting into this situation over and over and over and over again. You're right. So Biden and Harris are going to inherit that on top of everything else, including the pandemic, including some of the problems in the Middle East that you just referenced. And let's not forget that, was it today or yesterday? We're recording this on a Wednesday. I believe we just got approval for the sale of military jets to the United Arab Emirates. I believe fighter jets. I don't remember how many, but that region, as always in recent history, is a powder keg, and it does need more attention. Put it on the list. A lot of things are happening right now below the surface of this pandemic that are not getting the attention that they need. Also, one thing on Vilsack, he's a former governor of Iowa, so he does have a lot of background in agriculture. So he does bring the experience and the knowledge for that area that he needs. I kind of like the appointment in housing, and one thing that I would hope is maybe if confirmed, the new housing secretary can maybe work on something in urban areas that I used to write a lot about, and I think it needs attention, and maybe it's better coming from the housing department than agriculture, and that's food deserts in large urban areas, where part of the reason that a lot of folks have such a struggle in the inner city is because there is not access to good, fresh food. And, maybe something that can be done. It's not been solved through the agricultural department. Maybe somebody at the top of housing who recognizes these problems can help do something about it. So, I'm optimistic. As far as whether Biden and Harris will get the cabinet that they want as far as confirmation goes is absolutely an open question. We do not know what's going to happen in the Senate, and we won't know until January 5th and the results of the runoffs in Georgia. So, we'll see how it goes. But I don't see McConnell and the Republicans being eager to work with Biden and Harris at all. So
I don't either. Although, who knows? Biden did have a relationship with a bunch of the senators, including McConnell.
Right.
Will McConnell kind of mellow out a little bit once Trump is gone? Well, he wasn't mellow before Trump was in. He's kind of been the engine behind the total power play for the past 10 years. So I don't know that he's going to want to give up on that. But there may be some pushback from the few Republican moderates that are in the Senate. I could even see a couple of them going along with Democrats on some of this stuff. We'll see. I mean, he's had an iron grip on him, but, Collins won on her own merit. She did it, without help from, the stuff it was her response to the pandemic that won her that, where she was probably losing, but for that. So, she may just kind of decide, not switch parties or anything, but decide, a president should have the cabinet he wants. Ben Sasse, who is looking to be a moderate alternative, possibly run in 2024. He's from Nebraska. Yeah. He vetted it. He came out blistering attack on Trump, probably the most blistering of any in-office Republican I've seen, and won hands down in Nebraska. So. Right. He, of course, that was after the primary. Will he be primaried? Next time around, we'll see. But, and Murkowski, I mean, we've counted on him before, but they have to, with this craziness now, they've got to be called upon to be leaders to say, look, you got to shut this down. And if that means not necessarily caucusing with the Democrats, but breaking off and saying, no, Biden can have who he wants in his cabinet. That's the tradition. He can have the judges he wants. That's the tradition. Our job is to determine whether or not they're qualified. So there's that. I want to say one more thing about the transition, because all eyes are on the Secretary of Labor. Now, there's been a big push from progressives to have Bernie be that, and they're probably not going to bring Elizabeth Warren in because that Republican governor has not pledged to replace her with a Democrat. But the Republican governor of Vermont, has said he would replace Bernie with at least somebody who caucuses with the Democrats, meaning either a Democrat or an independent
Right.
with, who is left of center. So, and not only that, even if he broke that promise, it would only be a couple months before a special election, as opposed to having to wait for 2 years. So,
Right.
so they haven't. But
I'm sorry, go
the
ahead.
problem Bernie faces is he's got some union support, but he's also got some unions in there dead set against him. On the other hand, those unions were people who did not endorse Biden. They didn't endorse Trump, but they also didn't endorse Biden. So, does would that be a controversial pick? It depends on how you look at it. But definitely progressives, if he's not going to pick Bernie, are going to want somebody progressive and very strongly pro-labor in that position. And I think there's some other positions that have to be dealt with, but I think the eyes are on that. Progressives have not been happy with all the choices so far. They've, in fact, they've got a few complaints about them. Now, typical of progressives is, well, this person took money from this organization at some point in time, so they're obviously biased, not basically cherry picking stuff out, but they're going to be watching that position. And if it's not Bernie, it's got to be somebody like Bernie.
Do you think, well, a couple of things. One, the list of Republicans in the Senate that you said could maybe counted on for helping to confirm some of the nominees. I think to that list, you can probably add Mitt Romney. Also, though, one, do you think Bernie could be confirmed? And two, who do you think is going to be the nominee for Attorney General?
Boy, that's a tough one. First question is a little bit easier. I do think he can be confirmed because, contrary to what the politics are on the side, he actually has been in the Senate and in Congress for a long time. He actually has relationships with people who they might want him out of the Senate. That's it's one of the things is that they're not going to get the person who replaces him in Vermont will probably not be quite as to the left, so they might be happy to get him out of the Senate. I think and they know they would have to work with him if they canceled if they sabotaged it. And it's the Secretary of Labor. It's not. There's only so much the policy should be dictated from the top, anyways. But you want the influence. It's his role as an advisor, and how he does it. He has. They always talk about. I don't know why he didn't stress this in his runs, because they always attack senators as not having executive experience. But he was the mayor of Burlington, and business people liked him. He brought people together and solved things. They actually flourished pretty well while he was mayor. I've always wondered why his campaign didn't really play that up. So I do think it's possible. I do think it will be a rough road because there's definitely going to be Republicans and maybe a few Democrats who say no way. But it'll probably be a mixed bunch. And whether or not he gets more than 50, who knows? But I don't think it's impossible for him to get through.
Yeah. Attorney General.
God, I have no idea. I've been trying to think of that because that's a big one.
Oh, huge. Yeah. There are several names, a lot of names out there. Sally Yates, Doug Jones, actually, and Merrick Garland. Have you heard that one?
No, I haven't. I just assumed they would wait for another Supreme Court, opening, because there are rumors that Roberts might retire during the Biden administration. But that's an interesting one. That would be one. I want somebody in that position. I'm hoping Biden holds true to this, that he's not going to influence. He's going to stay out of the decisions. And if they decide to prosecute Trump or Trump associates, that he will just stay out of the way, not encourage it, not discourage it, and just keep that firewall up and restore that firewall to show that they have independence. So I hope it's somebody who doesn't just take the position that, well, you should never, it would set a bad precedent to prosecute an outgoing president, because this president and his associates need at least investigations and probably some prosecutions.
Well, let me ask you something about that. I'm interested in what the folks in your world would think about this. What about this? Biden appoints somebody to attorney general. I don't know, whoever it's going to be, and that person is confirmed. I am someone who thinks that the Trump folks, the Trumpists, should be held accountable for what they've done, because we don't want a precedent of corruption going forward. So I'm all on board with holding them to account. But what about this? What happens if the district attorney in Manhattan, Cy Vance, and the attorney general in the state of New York both pursue both civil and criminal charges against various people in the Trump universe?
Right.
Does that kind of absolve the U.S. Attorney General from having to do that and creating more of a division nationally, or not?
Well, first of all, we got to get out of this concept of dividing the nation. The nation's divided, and we've got people. We have had 4 years of graft. I mean, not even just, Plunkett of Tammany Hall. Did you ever read Plunkett of Tammany Hall? It's a great book written in the 1920s, I think it was, about somebody who's part of a machine who was just absolutely candid about things. And he talked about the difference between honest graft and dishonest graft, which both are illegal. Honest graft is stealing, he says, but dishonest graft is seeing your chances and taking them. That's basically, insider trading. Right. Knowing that a building is, that there's going to be a movement towards some type of rezoning somewhere. So you invest in a building knowing that it's going to be primary property and stuff like that. It wasn't even illegal at one time. Right. And that was part of the civil service reforms. Yeah. We are seeing all kinds of that kind of stuff, from having foreign leaders be in the hotels to the inaugural thing, 180,000 or whatever for, renting to the inaugural as, kind of a kickback there. I mean, and I don't know that the states can charge for everything that needs to be charged. Now, if Trump...
No, they can't charge for everything. And a lot of the folks in the Trump universe are, we think, going to be having pardons put in their shirt pocket. So from the get-go, there are going to be problems with federal charges. And that's why I've been reading recently that there are some people supposedly who have been trying to communicate to the incoming administration that the Manhattan DA and the New York Attorney General, and apparently some other attorneys general around the country, are all ready and set to go. And that may be something that happens, at least to hold them account at the state level in multiple states, maybe. So I don't know, because we don't know what a new attorney general would be thinking about that. We just don't know. It I'm sure will come up in confirmation hearings, no matter who the nominee is. That's going to be question number one, probably. So we'll see. And again, I'm on board with holding them accountable. I think it's been atrocious, and we don't want this to be seen as something that you can do as president. We don't want a president who's above the law, nor do we want any administration who is above the law. So I want them to be prosecuted in some way at some level. I'm just reading that there are people who seem to see an end run around the federal pardons.
I mean, there's no way, right? The pardons, of course, cannot get them out of any state charges. That's a totally different jurisdiction, and you don't want to mess things up, because if, for instance, states can't go after Flynn for the same charges because that's double jeopardy, right? So he's free to basically call for a military coup, like he did last week, and and just talk about military and separation there. I want to strongly recommend something, by the way. I didn't like it when I first saw the trailers on YouTube. It looked like a very stereotypical depiction of Donald Trump, maybe even overdone a bit. But Showtime is offering somehow, and my wife found it. I don't know what the terms are, but a week or 2 weeks or something of free viewing.
Mhm.
So I took the opportunity to watch the Comey Rule, and with Jeff Daniels playing the part of Comey, and a really incredible cast, Holly Hunter playing Sally Yates. I mean, and it's done in kind of a noir fashion. He was involved. Comey was involved with it. It's based a lot on his notes that he started taking,
Yeah. Right.
And he did not want to be depicted as a hero. It was not a propaganda film. I've seen Hollywood put out propaganda films just before elections. That's what I thought it was good, and it is kind of somber and preachy, but not on the points that you would think. It did not put Hillary Clinton in a positive light at all. The bind that she put him in, and her lawyers constantly haranguing it just was not very all that positive. I was impressed with the film. I was impressed with the nuances. I was impressed, and I came to understand why they're over depicting Trump a little bit. There's a reason. You're looking at it from the view of Comey, who is being called in to talk to him time in and time again, where Obama had recognized the firewall between them. Anyway, I want to strongly recommend it. When you mentioned Sally Yates, it made me think of that because, of course, Trump fired her not long into the administration, not long before he fired Comey. And so, and my concern would be is if everybody hasn't been pardoned, would Sally Yates look like she's on a personal vendetta if she started to prosecute? That'd be my only concern. Otherwise, I think she would be fine for the part. And for the role of Attorney General, I wouldn't object to that at all. But that would be my concern, is that she would probably, if anything, feel like, well, I really can't do that because it's going to look like revenge on my part.
Yeah. Well, and I have not heard her make any comment about the Attorney General position at all. I've heard a few others, asked if they would accept a nomination, and most of them say what you usually hear. Well, if the president asks, I will serve. That's the common response to that question. I haven't heard anything from her at all about it. So we'll see. I'm a big fan of hers, and I think that it would be good to. I would think it would be good to have a female as Attorney General right now.
I think that's going to happen. I think it will be a woman, I also think that's possibly a role that they give to. I'm really getting bad with names. She ran for president from Minnesota.
Amy Klobuchar.
Klobuchar. I would think that's another possibility. She's tough.
And she's fairly moderate, comparatively. But that's another good idea. I haven't heard her name mentioned, but she and Biden have of course known each other a long time, and she was U.S. attorney in the Twin Cities area of Minnesota. So absolutely, before becoming a senator.
Anyway, those are the possibilities. Anything else on the transition before we move on?
Well, I'm really interested in how all of this unfolds. And once again, the whole linchpin is the Georgia runoffs, and that will dictate how the confirmation process unfolds, because it'll determine who the majority leader in the Senate is. So, to me, the fact that the transition was delayed, and we have problems with the Trump administration even communicating with the incoming administration, not even being able to admit that there is a new administration, especially during a pandemic, when we need a plan, and we're at the precipice of the release of the vaccines, and we need a plan for how that's going to be delivered, how it's going to be funded, who gets the vaccines and when, and how are they distributed, how are they preserved. Some need to be in cold storage, some don't. There's so much that needs to be done. I think it's almost criminal that this transition has been delayed to the point that it has been so far. So I don't know. At this point, the only thing we can do is hope that we learn from this.
Hopefully too. Let's say you brought up the Georgia election. Let's talk a
Yeah,
little bit about that.
yeah,
A lot of money being spent in Georgia. All the ad time completely done. There were a couple of debates. They're going to be the only debates. Of course, Purdue refused to show up against Ossoff, just as he ditched the last debate after
yeah,
he got his clock run in the debate before that. He doesn't want to. And when Ossoff I get there's a part of the debates where you're allowed to ask the other person questions. So Ossoff they literally held the debate and had the empty red podium up there.
right.
I mean, that was dramatic. I think that the Purdue campaign was complaining about that, saying that shows your bias, that you're doing that because it, can only hurt. Well, you were invited, you didn't show up, that's what you do. So, but, he, Ossoff suggested that the reason he didn't want to show up is he doesn't want to incriminate himself with regard to the insider trading that it seems like he's done. And he says he's been exonerated. Loeffler has been accused of similar things.
Yep.
She did show up to the debate, but she was pretty much acting like a robot. I mean, it was the same 5 responses. And the same responses in calling Warnock radical liberal. I forget what else. It was just the same thing over and over again. I don't know if you remember the Star Trek episode where Harvey Mudd and the androids, they had to confuse the androids and the bracelets would start lighting up when you hit them with illogic. And I just expected at a certain point, to have that thing going up because she just stared. She wasn't even staring into the camera. It was like she was staring into space. She didn't want to be there. And she was probably shell-shocked from what happened to her the day before when Trump was supposed to come down and help the senators out, ended up making the whole rally about himself to the point where when they got up to the stage, half the crowd was chanting, "Fight for Trump." That they didn't really care about the senators, and they got a real problem because here you are going all in on the theory that the election was stolen, that the Dominion machines are going to flip votes. And if you really believe that, then why would you bother voting? All you do is add to its legitimacy. I have no doubt that there are Democratic moles on all the social forums and the rest pushing that, pretending to be Republicans, saying, "Yeah, let's boycott the election." But it won't take many votes to do that. Now, there's not a lot of movement in the polls. They're kind of tight. Trafalgar has the Republicans up, but Trafalgar always has the Republicans up. The polls, Survey USA did a poll, and they were actually pretty accurate with Georgia. I mean, like spot on. And the polls were actually accurate. They had Warren Ossoff playing Biden winning by just over 1 point, and it was by 1.2 points, and he won by 0.3 points. That's just a point off. That's well within the margin of error.
Right.
And anyway, Survey USA predicted both the Senate race polls too. They've got Warnock up by 7 and Ossoff up by 2. So by far the best poll for them. Still a month before the election, right? When that was taken. So it's hard to say, but I don't think debates worked for the Republicans, but I don't know how many votes there are to change. I think the only issue is whether or not all of the Republican, or pardon me, let me just correct that, all the Trump supporters are going to bother to come out to vote, or if they do, they're going to write in Trump.
I think some of them are going to write in Trump. I think the level of anger, especially if you follow what's being written about it in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and I recommend that to all of our listeners and viewers. There's a lot of anger there, and you're right. The Dominion voting machines are part of that anger, and a lot of them are convinced that it's Venezuelan folks who are involved in it, and they're going to flip the vote, so there's no reason to even go vote. That's still being talked about. We don't know what the turnout on the Republican side is going to be like. I think we're getting some pretty good indication that the turnout on the Democratic side is going to be pretty good. Maybe not as high as it was for the presidential, but it's going to be good.
Good for a special election.
For a special election, exactly, which is usually much lower on both sides, but especially on the Democratic side. We're not good at turning out except in presidentials. But it looks like it's going to be okay on the Democratic side. The question, of course, as you point out, is going to be on the Republican side. And here's what I'm getting at. That debate, especially the Ossoff-Perdue debate, if it's true that 50% of success is showing up, then Perdue made a big mistake in not showing up at all. And what I'm getting at there is when you're in a tough campaign, you know ahead of time what the toughest questions are going to be. You should anticipate those. And you and your staff should have worked out over a lot of time with a lot of hard work exactly what the response to those toughest questions are going to be. The fact that he doesn't even show up indicates a lot to me. First of all, it indicates that they don't know how to answer these questions at all, or they're just too lazy to try to figure it out. So they just don't show up. That's about as bad an image as you could create for your campaign when you're trying to convince people that you're going to show up in Washington and do the work for the Georgia people. That image there is as bad as it gets. And I thought Ossoff exploited it perfectly. He clearly anticipated that this was going to happen, and he was ready for it. I think in some of his answers, you can also hear that he was ready for Perdue to show up at the last minute unannounced, because he was clearly had studied all kinds of different contingencies for this whole thing, and I thought he did a good job. He even mentioned what I was just talking about, that Perdue doesn't show up for the people of Georgia. He shows up for himself only, and look, there's nobody here now. So I thought it was really well done. I thought Reverend Warnock in the Loeffler-Warnock debate was very skilled as well and had done his homework. As you mentioned, Kelly Loeffler did not have the right answers, but at least she was there. Yeah. So there's no image of an empty podium there, at least on her side. But it could be that she thought it was more important for her to show up than Perdue did, because, as you mentioned, in the polling, she seems to have the tougher race.
Yes. Yeah, I do too. I'm not going to try to predict that. I think maybe this next show or the show after it, I might try to make a prediction on it, but I just don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how to read Georgia. I had a real good feeling about Biden winning it this last time around, more so than Texas or Florida even, or even North Carolina. And I think that certainly both of them can win. That will, of course, bring it to 50 seats, which ties can be broken with Harris, and maybe we'll even give license for a couple of Republicans to come over. It'll make the transition easier. It'll mean judges get through easier. It'll mean policies get through easier. It means that things can get to the floor that McConnell is kept from even getting to the floor to be voted on, because he's afraid that he'll lose people, part of his own party, on them when they're faced with that vote. And he's done that. And I'm going to make a prediction later, so I'm not going to get too much into it. But I do think that the Republicans are going to return to be deficit hawks, and they're going to return to that rule that there can be no more spending unless it's offset by a cut somewhere else. And by doing that, you deny the economy most of the Keynesian benefit of any new spending. Right. I mean, you can play with it, make it more labor intensive than capital intensive, and create jobs. But really, Obama was the first president since the Depression to not be allowed to do Keynesian, spending policy to get out of a recession. Even Reagan got it. Bush got it. Everybody got it. And even if they didn't call it that. So we're going to basically have a nihilist power trip back in that are willing to basically sabotage the economy in order to win elections. Because for McConnell, it's just pure power. That's it. He wants the power. He got his. That's how he's gotten his Supreme Court majority, and how he got Trump to basically sign in. He basically got 5 years worth of judges rather than just 4. That's going to impact the courts forever. Now, you're going to have to start getting Clinton, and there are even a few Carter appointees in there that probably want to start retiring about now. And you'll probably have a rush of retirements early on so that Biden can get them in, but they may not retire right away if McConnell still has a lock on on the Senate. So this is really important. And the question is, and I'm not in Georgia, so I don't know, how the messaging is going. But if the Democrats down there really understand the importance of it, while significant of the Republicans think this is all about Trump coming, having a second term because they still believe it, they do have an advantage if their messaging is effective. Ossoff is doing great, but they really need to point out that, if they want a meaningful stimulus checks, they're going to need the Democrats to win that in order to get that.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen otherwise. Yeah. So anyway, I'll have a little bit more to say about that in my prediction, but we'll see where it goes. I can't read it. I think Ossoff can win. But you've got Ossoff is actually a stronger candidate than Warnock, but Perdue is stronger than Loeffler too. So it's a tougher race for him to win. But Warnock is doing good. He's got some things in the past that keep coming out, but that always happens. And they're going to try to do everything. He warned people, even had an ad saying, you're going to get a lot of negative campaigning, kind of like talk to me before you start believing any advertisements, that kind of a thing.
Yeah. A couple of things. One, I want to talk about, you mentioned John Roberts a little earlier. But first of all, before we get to that, I have been reading lately, and maybe you've seen this too, in the wake of that bizarre Trump rally in Valdosta, Georgia, where it was all about him. And it was just an airing of grievances, except for a little less than 2 minutes is all he gave the two Republican senatorial candidates up on the stage there. I have been reading that may have done more damage than it did benefit for Loeffler and Perdue, especially with independents. And
as Republicans were afraid of.
Exactly. That's apparently exactly what happened. I don't know that there's been any polling that reflects that yet, but there could be soon. But the other thing is, and you've mentioned this before, and I think it's intriguing. Do you think that Roberts, even though he's in good health and relatively young as Supreme Court justices go, would step down after Inauguration Day?
The rumors are he's burned out.
Ah, okay.
So,
all right.
And the rumors are he did not want to be replaced by Trump. He is an institutionalist, probably secretly a never-Trumper.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
But who knows? We'll find out. These are just rumors.
Yeah, and it's not something that he would have ever said in public anyway. But right. given the world you work in, I was curious as to what you were hearing on that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing. Is that he's burned out, doesn't want to be there, did not want to be replaced by Trump. Might try to stick it out and see if a Republican gets a more sane Republican gets elected in 2024, but that he would rather be replaced by Biden than Trump.
So that means that he would not necessarily step down quickly after inauguration. He might try to get a feel for how the politics are moving forward as Biden and Harris get more comfortable in office and the country gets more comfortable with them, see what's going on, and then make a decision.
That's what it sounds like. Again, this is just, you read the legal journals, and it's just a buzz going around. And I've seen seen it in too many places to dismiss it.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, that would be huge if he did that.
Yeah. So, all right, we're at 5 minutes. Time for predictions. We did not discuss Rudy. I mean,
wow.
What is there to talk about him? Let's leave it to Saturday Night Live. I mean, it's a clown show. I mean, he's brought in crazy people to testify. Yeah. The only other big time attorney that was on it, she also caught it, probably from him. I don't even want to get into, the litany of just, you think about it, the Borat moment, the Four Seasons moment, that crazy Michigan conference, several things that happened last week. The hair dye, everything. I mean, it just is like, it's hard to even know where to do it. I think I think it's fair to say that that's dead. He's going to be out of it for a little while. He is getting, by the way, the same treatment that Trump got, which very few people could get because that medication is in extremely limited numbers. It's a little bit of a controversy. People are wondering how he got that. It's supposed to be reserved for leaders and stuff, but he's getting it. Anyway, let's, unless you want to say something real quick, we can get to.
Well, that segues into one of my predictions. If you just want to go in that direction, I think Rudy, as I'm sure most people do, I think Rudy is going to be one of the people who gets pardoned, and he probably needs it. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I've got two quick things here on top of that. One, I think President-elect Biden is going to have some problems with some of his nominations for his cabinet. I don't know exactly which ones. General Austin probably is the most obvious one, but I have a feeling there are going to be some others that do bring up some problems. So what I've been reading is that they have a whole plan B for each nominee as to where they would go if one looks like they're going to be in trouble. They might not even allow them to go through the confirmation process. They might replace them even before, depending upon what they hear about problems. So that's going to be one thing to watch. The other thing is, I'm predicting, and this is mostly about the incoming Congress. I believe it will be the 117th Congress that's sworn in, on January the 3rd. I have a feeling, especially in the House of Representatives, that you're going to see a flurry of legislation that's aimed at that structural reform for our political system. Now, we could do a whole show on the minutia of what's being discussed, but I think there are going to be a lot of people who try to move in the direction of finding ways that third, fourth, fifth parties can actually become involved in our political process and actually have a voice. Whether any of that is successful, who knows? But I think it is at least going to begin a discussion of this kind of thing, structural change to our political system. I'm all for it. I know that it's a heavy lift, but I'm glad that at least some are going to be at least talking about it. It's past time to at least start the discussion. All
right. I'll be real quick. I do not think that a stimulus package is going to pass until January at the soonest. First of all, there are problems in both parties with unity around this. You've got the people that want to sabotage the economy for Biden. You've got the people that really are worried about the deficit. You've got the people that don't want money going to Democrats, in Democratic-run cities. Democrat-run cities apparently, and you don't want, and then within the Democratic Party, you've got people that want to have the stimulus checks go out and that be the primary thing rather than aid to businesses and the rest. So you've got the whole neoliberal versus progressive debate within the Democratic Party. I think there's just too many moving parts. There's not even a point where the two parties are negotiating because they're still negotiating within each caucus. I just don't see it happening before January, and what we get in the long run will depend on what happens in Georgia.
Yeah, and of course the tragedy of that is that a lot of things are going to expire December the 31st. Yeah. So a lot of people are going to be harmed by that. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think you're right. I think you're right on that.
Anyway, all right. Well, thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Matt, and thanks to Access Humboldt for allowing this. It doesn't slow down. Every week we just have more stuff, but this is actually a fascinating time in history to be in. Scary time in many ways, but we'll see how the transition goes, if there is a meaningful transition. But we'll be back next week. Until then, just keep paying attention to the news and hope for the best.